Are you ready to take your fantasy sports game to the next level? Introducing Fantasy Sports Logic and their groundbreaking Contrarian Edge Optimizer. With up to 8 live player projection data feeds and over 50,000 simulated outcomes, this is the secret weapon you've been waiting for. Whether you're a beginner or a seasoned pro, the Contrarian mode and multiple pro settings give you the flexibility to tailor it to your needs. And here's the best part. One price covers all sports and upgrades. MLB, NFL, NBA, PGA, we've got you covered. Ready to experience the power of fantasy sports logic? Get started today with our exclusive 7-day test drive for only $1. Join our FSL community of satisfied players who have unlocked the Contrarian Edge Optimizer advantage. Visit fantasysportslogic.com now.
In today's world, chaos is the only certainty. Over the last several years, we have witnessed the impossible occur in global events. The need for families and individuals to not only survive, but to thrive is now greater than ever. Experts the world over have emphasized the importance of generating additional forms of income. In the technologically advanced world we live in today, what if there was a way that we can use technology-powered AI where we can have algorithms do the work for you? Well, thanks to Algo Factory, that is exactly what we did. We teach you not only to leverage the market and carve out profits in the chaos, but we show you how to have a better quality of life by creating your own custom algorithm that trades on your behalf 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All the while, you can continue with your day-to-day responsibilities, checking in when needed on your trades that is working for you. Many clients of Algo Factory have been able to fund their savings, go on dream vacations, and even quit their 9-to-5 jobs. They have created more time for themselves and more time for their families, all through the power of advanced AI and their personal custom algorithm. Algo Factory. Trade your job. Upgrade your life.
All right, folks. It's the one and only V, the Guerrilla Economist, and I have with me the man who needs an introduction, the one and only Matthew Ehret himself, the brain trust of the Multipolar Reality. Matthew's here. You can find him over at the CanadianPatriot.org, CanadianPatriot.org, as well as the RisingTideFoundation.net. It is imperative for you to go forth and purchase Matthew Ehret's books. It is an absolute magnum opus of understanding the geopolitical, geostrategic layout by understanding the history the best we know how, and that is through Matthew opening it up for us and showing us the play-by-play, the absolute foundation and scaffolding of the oppression that we're facing today. And you can find that right there in the RisingTideFoundation.net, and also support him on his Substack, MatthewEhret.com/Substack. And Substack.com/Matthew Ehret, where you can join his day-to-day updates, as well as the symposiums that him and his wife Cynthia put on weekly. It's really amazing, an absolute, what do I call it? The man's a modern-day Library of Alexandria when it comes to all things geopolitical. So, Matt, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Hey, man. Hey, I always feel a little bit humbled. And actually, no, the opposite of humbled. My ego feels like it's a little bit too big for my head.
No, that's
you
good.
introduce me, and I always appreciate that.
No, that's good.
So
I want you to
very
feel that
much.
way. I want you to feel that way. I want you to be pumped up and be an absolute animal when you come in here.
Well,
Like
let's do our best. We'll try to be as civilized beasts as we can possibly be, Renaissance beasts that can hopefully blow the lid off of some lies, showcase some important underappreciated elements of reality for people, and hopefully give people the resources that they need to navigate through their week with a little bit more certainty than they had beforehand. So let's see where this goes. There's obviously a lot on the table this week to discuss. A lot of battles waging. So I figured, in the course of today's little broadcast, we'll touch upon some of the developments around the Multipolar Alliance's fight with the emerging conference in South Africa, some of the drama behind the scenes that's taking place that we can only sort of allude to. Also, that's connected to it. We have the Africa-Russia Summit, which is the second such summit, the first having been in 2019, and this is going to begin tomorrow, and it's going to go on for 2 days with African leaders coming to St. Petersburg to discuss economic, security, energy, grain, food policy with their Russian counterparts. Putin delivered a really solid, or he wrote a solid editorial that was printed across every single African nation's press as sort of a preamble to the spirit of what this conference is. We have some other developments on the Pacific side of things, so I think we'll find a way to spin this all together in a useful way.
I mean, you mean to tell me that the African leaders were not in Washington, D.C., asking for the latest ESG program or a derivative or some sort of financial scam they could buy into on Wall Street? They're not interested in that, Matthew?
Well, I think they've felt the burn enough over the last decades and even centuries. You look at some of these maps of Africa before the colonialists got in there, and we're talking, the maps that are available that people can look at that have been scanned from the 15th century, 16th century, and even earlier. And what you see is not exactly the sort of thing one expects to see if you just were trained in 20th century geopolitical history, which just features, arbitrary boundaries and borders that were created. I mean, we see Africa, we see 54 countries on a map, but I mean, the borders that we see are completely arbitrary. This was done. Most of these borders were just created by imperialists at the end of the 19th century who never went to Africa and were just like, using information that was gathered from intelligence agents, Orientalists based in Africa on the ground who would profile different tribes, evaluated different tribal rivalries between Hutus and Tutsis and other ethnic groups of the former kingdoms. Because Africa was formerly a land of many kingdoms, some of which were very culturally advanced, artistically, scientifically, economically advanced. We had delegations from Africa, Black Africa, in Europe in the time of Charlemagne, throughout the medieval period into the Renaissance period. And this has all been washed away, right? And what the technique is sort of what has been used under the National Endowment for Democracy and CIA in our more recent decades. But this is not a new innovation by the CIA. They just sort of maybe upgraded and rebranded it a little bit. But it was what was done in the 19th century. And you profile different ethnic divides amongst peoples who live in areas that happen to have resources you want to exploit or a nation you want to destabilize. And then you amplify those ethnic divisions, the hatreds, and you work it and you create borders. That was what was done in the creation of when King Leopold and his British and French and Dutch counterparts were drawing up the map. It was literally being informed by partially territorial desires to get control, but also based on the idea of let's just make a divide in a certain area between Sudan and Ethiopia or Ethiopian Eritrea or whatever, in order to better create and inflame a situation of hostility that has been used even today. We look at it. You have Sudan blowing up yet again. There's been 3,000 deaths at least in a situation in a nation which, since it got its independence from the British in 1954, it's been in constant turmoil. International corporations, the heirs of Cecil Rhodes's, De Beers and mining conglomerates, centered in London's Central Command have continuously exploited this region and have ensured constant civil war amongst these warring groups. They've done the same thing in Eritrea and beyond, but Sudan big time. And now Sudan is being plunged once again back into a civil war. And so far it's been it's been stopped, the collapse into hell. And I'm talking about, South Sudan, but also in the north, which were divided arbitrarily in 2011 by Susan Rice. But Russia and China played a key role in keeping them from collapsing, but now it's happening again. And why? It's largely because Sudan is part of the Horn of Africa, and Africa is a zone right now where there's a huge fight over the future of humanity as a whole. So whoever can keep that region underdeveloped, which, I mean, the Horn represents 240 million people living in many cases in a lot of poverty, although there's a lot of water, a lot of food. Whoever can keep that region underdeveloped can ensure that, the Arab states of the Gulf region of Southwest Asia can better also be undermined too, because a lot of the mercenaries that were deployed during the Yemen war or were deployed and used by the U.S. military-industrial complex were either trained in Africa or were actually Sudanese mercenaries, who work for pennies compared to what U.S. mercenaries or Canadian mercenaries work for, and are then deployed as killing machines as part of the ongoing operation to destabilize these nations. Oftentimes they're working with different Al-Qaeda affiliated groups like Boko Haram from Mali, but there's many other branches of Al-Qaeda sponsored, patronized by the CIA and MI6 throughout Africa, and that have direct links vis-a-vis into Egypt, especially into Syria, into Iraq, into other nations. So there has been a danger of development. So when you take into consideration the fact that right now there is constant fighting going on behind the scenes, we're only privy to some of it. And we see certain shadows of it, like when the the deputy chair of the Duma came out not that long ago saying that we need to create and establish a BRICS currency with a new financing mechanism around which local currencies can be traded, but also using a common basis, kind of like some sort of a common basis that would be tied to commodities, perhaps metals, a combination of both, as Sergei Glaziev pointed out. This is the deputy chair of the Duma. His call to do this was also amplified by President Lula da Silva in Brazil. You had leading figures within China who have also given their support to this. So you have a fight based on the recognition that the U.S. banking system, the Anglo-American banking system, is collapsing. It will collapse. We need to create a situation where we can have a new alternative mechanism that won't be dominated by those arsonists who created the collapse. And, certain people, I think, overly champion one side or poo-poo it. So, on the one hand, there are a lot of voices in alternative media saying, aha, the new BRICS currency is already here. And it's like, no, it's still quite a ways away. They're still fighting. It's not a guaranteed thing. And, you see that with the fact that India and South Africa, which are two nations who are among the weaker links of the BRICS currently in the BRICS Plus, which is in reference to the broader, greater system. I mean, there's 40 nations that have already signed on with their intention officially requesting to join the BRICS, on top of its financial institutions like the New Development Bank. But India, South Africa currently are in a weaker position than the other three official founding members. So, the Indian foreign minister and the minister of finance has said, no, creating a new BRICS currency is not what we want to do. That's not on the agenda. South Africa has said something similar, like, no, we won't be discussing that. And people then, make the mistake, I think, of just hearing words that are stated outwardly and then either saying, well, I don't want to listen to that. It's still going to happen. Or they say, well, it's all being sabotaged. It's not going to happen. And they get depressed. Here's an article from Fortune. How long will the dollar last as the world's default currency? The BRICS nations are gathering in South Africa this August with it on the agenda. And it is on the agenda. And that's the thing. So South Africa is a zone which is a weak link. There's a lot of foreign intelligence operations still active. The Rhodesians never left Rhodesia, right? The leadership of South Africa has made it very clear that that they appreciate Putin even not having chosen to go. Putin made it clear he won't be physically going, and Lavrov will be going in his stead. Why? Because Putin's not stupid. He knows he's walking into a zone that's full of intelligence agencies, different groupings that could be a danger to his security and safety. So safety first. He chose to remain behind, and Lavrov will be going in his stead. But part of it was a demonstration that, you know, South Africa does have a lot of pressure by the ICC, the International Criminal Court, the same Soros-funded agency that was artificially created in the 90s, funded by Soros, Malik Brown, as Malik Brown, a Soros affiliate, who both played a role, as people should know, in overthrowing the, in doing something very bad in the US. I don't want to get this video taken down off of YouTube in 2020. And these are the two leading top dog agents who brought and funded and promoted the ICC as if it were some official institution that was used and has been used to destabilize target governments, whether it was Slobodan Milosevic, who actually was, when you research it, largely innocent of all of the crimes that he was accused of having been accountable for in 1998-99, or President Omar Bashir, the former president of Sudan himself, who was given an arrest warrant as a sitting president. The first time a sitting president was ever given an arrest warrant by the ICC, an agency that was just simply used by these Rhodes scholars, right, to delegitimize elected governments or governments who had been representing officially the sovereignty and the nation of the people that they represented. So Bashir, having been a supporter of decolonization, of working with Gaddafi on great water projects, great electricity projects, as well as Mubarak of Egypt. These are the things that Bashir was doing in the decades before he was ousted finally in a coup in 2019. That had to be undone. So the ICC was done for that purpose. Genocides were blamed on President Bashir that he should not have been held accountable for, as far as the genocide in Darfur. There's a whole story there. And ultimately, that was what justified the carving up of Sudan. Now the ICC has put an arrest warrant, as people know, on Vladimir Putin's head, and South Africa has chosen to bend to the pressure of saying, well, yeah, I guess maybe that would create a diplomatic crisis if you did show up on our territory, and there's a lot of pressure for us to arrest you. So it's best that you just don't even come and get rid of that entire scandal. So it's good that they did that, but it is, again, messy. Africa and Russia, they have, as people should know, Putin stated this in his, I guess you could say it was an editorial that set the tone for the Africa-Russia summit. He said, quote, "We have consistently supported African people in their struggle for liberation from colonial oppression. We have provided assistance in developing statehood, strengthening their sovereignty, and their capabilities. African solutions must exist for African problems. We have never tried to impose on our partners our own ideas about internal structure, forms, and methods of management, development goals, and ways to achieve them." That was just a part of the broader statement of support that Putin delivered in what will be coming online. Now, we're going to have a lot of economic deals that will be signed. We know that Russia is very interested in assisting Africa in building nuclear power. That's also extremely important. And also developing their mining and industrial resources. Now, Africa currently has only $20 billion in trade with Russia, which is still an explosion compared to what, positively, it's a huge growth of what it was 20 years ago. Compared to China, which is over $200 billion, it's still a fraction, but it's moving in the right direction. And the quality of investment is very different, where Russia is especially providing support through not just Wagner, but also other forms of military training and support to African governments who desperately need to have their security systems amplified and upgraded so that they can counteract the CIA asymmetrical warfare operations that have been deployed over many decades to destabilize and destroy them from within. So that's something that you don't see coming out of the Western approach to Africa. It's a very different spirit, whereas in the Western nations, when they sit down with Africa, when they pull the African leaders into Washington and sit them down and lecture them, they basically say, we're going to give you money, but only on the conditions that you do not invest it in your military, that you privatize whatever you have in your economy, that you open up the door to Western corporations who will be granted mining rights, oil exploitation rights, cobalt, whatever. As far as extracting wealth, that will very little of it will go back to your own people or your own nation. None of it will be permitted. The loans that we give you will not be permitted to go towards vital infrastructure that you desperately require to lift people out of poverty. And they basically lecture these nations of Africa to reform and restructure in order to make them more pliable as colonies, satraps of the Western imperial finance. So this is a very different approach than what we see coming out of Russia and China's relations with Africa, which is, of course, why, again, you have such efforts for destabilization, especially in Sudan, where, again, the Sudanese government offered Russia a port on the Red Sea, which is a vital port. That is very close to Djibouti. This is where China also has built up a rail line that could easily extend, now that there's peace in Yemen, through the Red Sea, the Bab el Mandeb Strait, 25 kilometers of a gap between Africa and Yemen. That there's been projects online, feasibility studies have been done. Chinese Gulf states have been openly hungry to invest in building this rail line, and which would also involve highways for cars, as well as oil pipelines, natural gas pipelines. So that would then go towards the Djibouti to Addis Ababa rail line, which China has also made a point will connect very soon, unless these nations can be, turned inside out, which I don't think is going to happen. But still, that's the fight. But this will connect down into the Kenya, Mombasa, Nairobi rail line that China has already finished building. There's programs that China has signed, inked deals with Sudan and Ethiopia to connect these rail lines into Sudan. There's programs that China has invested to upgrade Sudanese colonial rail that has fallen into disrepair. There's about 5,000 kilometers, huge amounts, that will be modernized by China and integrated both into Ethiopia, but also upwards into Egypt. Egypt has a high-speed rail line as well that would connect the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, which is now underway. You have a Chinese firm which is helping with that construction. A Russian company is building some of the rail cars for that. That's underway, and you have a broader continental rail line system. If people actually look at the maps of what China is building with Africa as part of the Africa Agenda 2063 outlook, this calls for building things like the Trans-African high-speed rail corridor, stretching all the way from the east and west coast in 11 countries immediately, bringing that on board, being a part of what would involve industrial corridor. So over between 70 kilometers on either side of the rail, what is planned for this new, or actually it's a restoration of an old forgotten method of nation building that we used to have with like Lincoln's Transcontinental Railway or Tsar Alexander II's Tsar Alexander III's Trans-Siberian Railway, is the idea that when you build a railway, you're not just building rail, you're building the capacities and cities in between the points of connection. So you're condensing space-time by making it more efficient. You're cutting off, 5, in the case of the Arctic, for example, if they were to build just, rail lines going from China through the Bering Strait into Alaska and North America, that could cut off days and days of travel time that would normally you'd have to expect if you were witnessing shipping moving by sea, which is very slow. If you upgrade that to high-speed rail, that can go 400, 500 kilometers an hour. That's even faster. If you upgrade that to magnetic levitation, that goes even faster. So these are all the things that currently the African leaders of many of the African states that have been burnt by Western manipulators are hungry for. China's inking the deals. Ground is moving. This is the Belt and Road Initiative in Africa. It is not debt trap diplomacy. They're building capacities, building industrial development, manufacturing hubs where these African leaders or African nations will be seeing their people trained to be the engineers, to manufacture the parts, right, to process the metals that are under their own soil, the iron and other things that will then be not just sent abroad as raw materials to be refined in a foreign country, but rather be refined and processed there and used increasingly there in Africa for the sake of the Africans, who could then be able to finally do the things that the great Pan-African leaders like Kwame Nkrumah and like Patrice Lumumba and so Thomas Sankara and so many others were fighting to do, which was to help finalize the wave of independence movements that Africa began in the wake of World War II, which were granted independence politically, but were never granted independence economically. So that revolution was never finalized. They're still economically enslaved in the same sort of way that the Africans who were brought to the United States as slaves in the 19th century were never, it took a long time even for that to end. Even after slavery was officially abolished, there was still cash cropping and other things that gave the slaves the illusion of being free, but in reality it was the same slave owner plantations that still gained control after Lincoln was murdered, that were still running the KKK, that were still utilizing the Scottish Rite Freemasonic networks to interface with their British high command, in manufacturing a lot of or controlling the growth of the modern deep state, and said, okay, we're going to pay 25 cents a day for our former slaves to work the land and pick the cotton that they were doing anywhere when they were officially enslaved, and they're going to give 90% of that to us as part of the deal that we have with them to let them, in a free way, work the land that they were doing formerly as slaves. But it was a fraud. They were still economically enslaved. It was even worse because now there was the illusion of freedom. So that's the same sort of thing that was then done to all of Africa after World War II, especially, with the illusion of freedom, because we don't physically have shackles over most of the Africans who are working the cobalt mines, but they have no other mode of life. And it's still the same Royal Dutch Shell, Barrick Gold conglomerates who are just pillaging this whole continent by design. It's really deadly. So this is again the breath of fresh air that's coming on right now with Russia, China, also India having a different outlook towards Africa. And this is why there's a big push for war with Russia and China, especially. So yeah, there's so many different points, hot spots around the world where there is a push to blow things up. But that's where we're at right now, at least on that level.
And the most craziest thing is, Matt, is that the U.S. has no solutions. And I was talking about it earlier this morning, and I used the example of the Stanley Black & Decker Corporation, who tried to create a $90 million tool manufacturing factory right here in the United States to manufacture wrenches. And they spent $90 million. They dug the first shovel into the ground. And then within 3 years, without the factory even being completely finished, it was over and done with. Grand opening, grand closing. The U.S. is completely incapable. We have no solutions. The only Western country that had some sort of solution that could really bring it to bear in Africa is Germany. And Germany is being deindustrialized as we speak. It's incredible. So the people in Africa, they're like, okay, we can go with the insolvent broke West that has no ideas, that talks marketing scams, or we can go with the rest of the world, the 139 plus some odd countries who have already signed on to the BRI, who are already signed on to the BRICS, who have already signed on to GCO, SCO and Global South and Gulf Cooperative, right? And move this thing forward. And the rest of the world's leaving the West in the dust, man. It's incredible to witness this.
No, I know it's absolutely wild, and people think that it's difficult for some people to wrap their minds around because at the end of the day, this would be this would be very, very beneficial to the United States itself to be a part of this type of process and to assist in development and alleviating poverty and increasing security by developing real development around the world. It would be in the interest of the U.S. and the corporations managing so much of U.S. foreign policy. It would be in their benefit if they did it. But then I think this is a good reminder, this crisis that we're living through, which is threatening the lives of Americans, the viability of America itself as a governable state based on any type of democratic institution. Not only is this being destroyed and undermined, but the viability of nations everywhere is being undermined. And it's showing us that it's not really about capitalism, because people say, oh, but isn't capitalism about doing business and creating capital? So wouldn't you do better business if you were just honestly trying to help these countries avoid war? Because at the end of the day, when you're killing your customers, that's bad. That should be understood as bad for business. And that's a lesson that we've forgotten how to learn. We used to know that, but then we forgot that as the military-industrial complex became ever more embedded with the models that Rand Corps generated to justify the idea that you could make more viable profits and by war than through peace. But yeah, sure, you make profits for shareholders. You power and fuel industry to produce things, but what you're producing are guns and bombs, and when these bombs are used, they might cost a lot of money to make. They might create a lot of jobs. They might justify industry, but they're used to destroy the physical economy and the people who make the physical economy worthwhile. And then they're gone, right? Once you create them, they're designed to be destroyed, to cease existing. So it's a very illusory idea of value and of wealth, which is actually a negative wealth in the long run, because you're also destroying the psycho-spiritual climate, the metaphysical preconditions for which people for new discoveries to be made. Because if you're living in a state of fear over your security, if you're living in deprivation, which is the consequence always of war and famine, you will not be in a situation where your mind will function all that in a healthy way, such that you won't be able to make the discoveries you could have made into science, into the arts, and you won't be able to think about the new technologies that you could apply to benefit your nation and your people and all of humanity. That won't happen, which is the supposed to be for a healthy capitalist paradigm. That should be the focus, is always making that improve such that everything else you're doing as far as investing into what businesses, right, that exist in your society. Like, look at Kennedy's system of creating industrial tax credits was based on an idea that there was objective moral values that society required in order to thrive, that involved valuing companies that could produce heavy machinery, machine tools that could then be vital for not just keeping people in employment, but also providing for the infrastructure needs and the manufacturing needs to support the people of the United States as a whole. And also then that would infuse authentic value into the US dollars that were in circulation, that gave the US dollar much greater purchasing power because it was tied to a physically productive process. And so if you could prove and demonstrate that you had something valuable objectively to offer to society as an entrepreneur, you would get a tax credit, so you wouldn't have to pay taxes on your investments into your R&D, into upgrading and maintaining your industrial equipment. And that was good. And then if you wanted to do have a casino and you wanted to do rapacious gambling or something, it's not like you weren't allowed to have a casino. It's just that you would have to pay through the nose taxes, for something that was ultimately not beneficial to society. So it made it more lucrative to do things that were actually good for society, and it made it than it would to do something that was bad. Whereas today it's all upside down. The worst types of values that cherish activities that hurt society, whether it's the drug legalization policies advanced and funded by assholes like ICC funder George Soros, who's behind a lot of the harm reduction drug legalization policies that are trying to make drugs mainstream and bring the drug dealers into the normal business class. That's happened already with the Bronfman family in Canada, that used to be a criminal gang throughout the 20th century behind the growth of organized crime, and just simply brought them into the official networks of power under Charles Bronfman, Edgar Bronfman, and today Stephen Bronfman, their son, the son of, I think it's Charles, who's a big handler of the Liberal Party of Canada. I mean, this is the thing. But the logic is, oh, look how much money we make off of legalizing it, and people can now pay taxes off of their drug purchases. And it's not just weed; it's expanding, as we see in British Columbia, to everything. And it's purely monetarist, and it has no sense of the value that but it's like the war thing too. It's like, yeah, we make a lot of money in the moment, but look at what we're creating as a physical reality for the world and into the future is a negative value. It's a destructive value. Or windmills and solar panels as well. And they're trying to incentivize activity which will reduce human life by reducing our ability to sustain ourselves, since you can't, melt industrial steel or anything with solar panels. But that's the sort of thing Biden is offering to Africa. So when the Africans are brought to Washington, they're told by Biden, "Oh, we'll offer. We've got a package of God knows how many billions that we can give you for things like the global green gateways that will spread windmills and solar panels over Africa, but will deprive Africa of having any hope in hell into the future of ever having industry. You just won't have it. You're going to just have these solar panels, and you'll be able to export a little bit of solar power energy to Europe, who, by the way, we're also going to sabotage because they're not going to be allowed. Europe as a colony is not going to be allowed to access Russian natural gas or oil, and increasingly not even China. So even Europe is being told that by the US and the British that they have to cut off relations with China, which has now sunk. I think there's been a loss of 5% of trade to China, and that the US wants to just cut all of that off. So it's a very different idea. And it's just insane because, at the end of the day, none of this has any moral or scientific validity. If you cared about humanity, you wouldn't stick us into a green cage and make us dependent upon windmills for our needs. But instead, they're giving things like Greta Thunberg honorary diplomas in universities so now Greta Thunberg, this poor young girl who has no sense of what the hell is going on in the world, is she's being heralded as she's a member of the UK Faculty of Public Health. She's been given the honorary professorship of theology at the University of Helsingfors.
It shows you how much of a joke the West is, man.
It's a joke. It's a
joke. This is a mentally challenged kid, okay, who is used as a prop, an absolute prop. We've all seen the videos of the fake staged police arrests where the police are working with her to get in position. Okay, the camera's going to be here, and let's go ahead and pick these people up, and we're going to take you in, and we're going to pretend to be arrested and booked. And now she's given honor. This is the joke the West has. It's incredible. No serious country, no serious civilization would ever do such a thing as stupid as this.
No. And as somebody just pointed out, Meg in the chats pointed out she's an abused child. Yeah, she's an abused child. That's the thing. That just and there's so many kids who are all being psycho-spiritually abused right now. The kids who are in their 15, 16 years old in universities are going through a woke brainwashing. I mean, in BC, they just created a scandal this week because there was a high school in British Columbia that had a speaker going through how to do safe snorting and gave away kits. The school gave away kits for safe snorting of cocaine, and they had instruction manuals inside of this kit describing what you can snort, what can't you snort. If you're a first-time user for snorting, here's what you should only do this much fentanyl. If you want to snort fentanyl, you can snort methamphetamines, apparently, and it's not just cocaine, and they're promoting it. It reads like a little promotional booklet. Also advising kids to carry around lube and condoms because apparently, if you're going to get high as a kite, you might want to have sex. So they're actually telling these kids, 13, 14 years old, how to engage in drug-fueled sex. This is as a normative thing, right? So kids, this is what kids are being told is the norm that they have to calibrate themselves to, as they're also going to the school cafeterias. And this is happening all over North America, where kids are being indoctrinated to, or they're being given free bug taste testing, salted bugs and sugary bugs and things, just to help them get over the psychological dissonance and accept, that this is actually the way of eating for the future, where Toronto has just unveiled the biggest edible cricket farm in the world at the same time as the Trudeau government has unveiled, along with the Netherlands, a committed program to shutting down 30% of the fertilizer use across Canadian farmers and green policing stations. The blueprints have been already leaked and circulated to the Canadian media, most of whom have ignored it, but some, like Rebel News, have covered it. And you could see that the plans are to focus on the prairie provinces, Manitoba, Saskatchewan. They've done the same thing in France around a green policing apparatus that could then ensure that the farmers don't abrogate the federal government's commitments to cut down the use of fertilizers and other vital things for their crops, which is a war against the farmers who are already underwater, generally economically. I just saw you pulling something really disturbing up there. What the hell was that about? Anal what?
Yeah. Harvard University, because Harvard is such a bastion of educational prowess. They have a university. They have a course every year that they run. It's a special workshop called "What in the Butt."
That's a workshop?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Show you, man. Yeah, let me
That's
show you. Look. Here it is.
Harvard University Sex offers what in the butt anal sex 101. Oh my
That's
God.
Right.
We're in a dark age. It's official. Okay.
It is, because anal sex is the great equalizer. Oh yeah.
Wow.
Sick.
Right. We all have that in common. We all have a butt, right? That's great. So the 60s had the civil rights movement, and now we got what in the butt. Yeah. And students, what kills me is students are going to Harvard. They're paying like $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year for their tuition or more. And how are you going to pay that off with that type of knowledge? I guess you can go into the sex trade. I guess you could be a
Matt, like I said, like over a decade ago, the future of America is sweatshops and sex work. That's what's going to happen if the people in this country do not wake up. What in the butt? All the sexual. This is going to be some sort of neo-technical, techno-feudal Sodom and Gomorrah, man. I have no other ways to describe it. Sex work and sweatshops.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, but where do you go with that? Because I mean, at the end of then you have also. I mean, a lot of these sex workers are going to lose their jobs because you're going to have like online. What do you call it? Virtual. Virtual.
Yeah, you're gonna have
virtual thing. Anyway,
yeah.
This is insane. This is really insane.
Yeah.
But again, this goes back to the question of, well, what is value? At the end of the day, this is not a crisis of the economy. It's not a crisis of the political system so much. It's a crisis of the culture. And culture, for those, I mean, it's a very obscure, I think, word that we haven't been privy to really thinking properly about, but that's the center of everything. The oligarchs think very deeply about culture, and they have for thousands of years. That's everything is downstream, economically, politically, from culture. And if you think about it, like that's the thing. This thing called culture is the thing which shapes our identities, our values, our passions, our desires, our ideas about the way the world works beyond our life, as well as what we are within a process. So all of these things are shaped, especially the feelings that we have, how we come to judging things. All of that is shaped by this invisible field called culture. It is partially tied to the scientific concepts, the artistic, aesthetical concepts. It's sort of a mix of all of that, but it's also something that individuals can in turn shape. So it both shapes the individuals within a society, but it also can be affected by, for good or for bad, the individuals within that society. It's a reciprocal thing, right? It's like a feedback. But it's not just like a computer feedback that doesn't qualitatively change, because computer feedback loops are based upon a controlled, fixed program of binary systems that can only increase from the standpoint of quantitatively more or less. That's how, binary, like cybernetics or systems analysis, feedback loops and changes occur. It's simply through a linear type of more and less function. Whereas with human systems and culture, you're not dealing just with quantity, but you're dealing with these inexpressible qualities that are real, albeit not mathematically expressible. So you can't, mathematically put or model things like justice. We could see where materially, you could mathematically model a human grouping, a human society, and interface it with another society based on the numbers of those people, the types of terrain that they live on. All of these different variables that you could think about could be measured, put onto a chart, graphed, tied to an algorithm that traces certain like norms of activity that you could then use. That's how some anthropologists often will look at human societies, or especially tribal societies. They'll treat them kind of like ant farms, and they'll look, okay, there's every day these women go to the well. That's a cycle that could then be put into an algorithm. These kids do this, go to this mining company or whatever. But you can't see justice in there. You just see the mathematical expression of material actions. And then the human mind has to then see, okay, well, how do I even think about justice? Well, you can see where it's lacking. You can see if, okay, the resources for that society that you're mapping are primarily being transferred to maybe a small clique of warlords. And you can see that there's a huge amount of poverty for the masses. You can sort of see where, okay, I see that this wouldn't happen if justice were present, right? Concepts of justice would not occur. If there was constant warring going on over material things with a neighboring grouping of people, you could say, okay, there's probably justice lacking, but you're not seeing justice per se. You're seeing where it's absent. And then you can see, okay, well, in a society where there's a qualitative growth of the quantity, but also quality of life of the people, there's greater harmonization, reducing conflict with both themselves internally, but also that society's neighbors. You're seeing new technologies being created and brought online. You could say, okay, well, I'm not seeing justice there, but I don't see its absence. I see the effects of its presence. But justice itself is a transcendental. It's a metaphysical, universal principle. This is something that oligarchs who are power obsessed, they don't acknowledge that. But this is the thing that shapes our values. So when John F. Kennedy puts forth, like I said, things like his industrial tax credit, or Franklin Roosevelt has a very similar policy that involves a protective tariff around the dumping of foreign goods into America in the 1930s, as well as his use of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which sort of acts like a national bank unto itself, providing loans to entrepreneurs in America who are building things that are useful. It's not the money, it's not the profit per se that causes value. It's not because people want the money that there is value or a number associated with the value of what the US currency is going to be. It's rather because there are moral values active in the society that value the increasing of the productive powers of labor of the people, as well as the increase of the minds of the people's powers of discovery, such that you then morally can create a climate whereby the business class and investments are then tied to that which is objectively beneficial, but also for the greater good, but also individually beneficial for the people who are investing in that company and participating in the growth of those companies. So when people today, they try to like accuse China of being, like I get attacked. I'm sure you sometimes get attacked as well. Yes. for speaking well of China, because they're like, oh, you commie lover.
Yes, we're a bunch of commie lovers, man. I don't know about you, Matt. I have my Vladimir Lenin pin next to me, and I have my Karl Marx uniform ready to go. We're a bunch of commie lovers, man.
Yeah,
it's these low IQ ad hominem binary thinking that screws people and puts them in an absolute box that they cannot think clearly. The world that they think they know is burning around them, and they have no idea what the hell's going on.
No idea. And I mean, it's again nominalism, because people see the word, Communist Party of China, and it's like, yeah, other than the name, try to find anything inside of China and how things are done in China that fits what Karl Marx is talking about in Das Kapital. You've got a thriving, robust business class. You have more entrepreneurs growing by the day in China than you do in the West, where you see that same former entrepreneurial class atrophying, and by design, by destruction. Whereas in China, you have even more patents being registered right now by individuals who have ideas, can patent them, get money off of ideas.
That's a sign of a communist country. When you could file more technological patents by individuals than any other country in the world, that's a sign of communism. When you have more female billionaires, that's a sign of communism. When 3 millionaires and 1 billionaire are made every week in China, that's also a sign of communism. I don't know if you knew that, Matt. I don't know if you knew that. But yeah, that's communism.
Yeah, that's the new, right? All the definitions are changing. When Lamborghini, our new woke age.
Yeah, when Lamborghini sells more cars in China than they do anywhere else in the world, it's a sign of communism.
Well, I'm told that men can get pregnant now. So what, if men can get pregnant, then communists can become entrepreneurial capitalists. It's the same thing, apparently.
Absolutely. See, they're not as sophisticated as we are in the West, because in the West we're enlightened. We men can become women, women can become men. In fact, I think I'm pregnant. I had a delicious Five Guys burger for lunch with some French fries, and I feel kind of pregnant. I could be pregnant. If you think that I can't get pregnant, man, then you are a transphobe.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And as it should be, frankly, I'm okay with that, because at the end of the day, this is pushing our society into such a confrontation with the internal contradictions of our own system of values, where what we say is in such contradiction, what we say we value is in such contradiction to reality, that the absurdity of it is itself healing, in a sense, when people can actually see fights over physical, like biological males who are destroying their female competitors in sport, or even not just in sport, but also in acting. Like best actress awards are being given to biological males. Best CEO awards for women CEOs in America are being given to biological males. Like there's really it's an absurdity on so many levels, because you couldn't say, oh, this is just now happening over the space of athletics, which requires sort of physical brawn, but it's rather now also happening. There's sort of a recolonization and an undoing of all of the successes of women from the suffragettes from 100 years ago or more. All of that success in actually fighting for and attaining better rights as women, which has been thousands of years. Women have been treated unjustly. That's true. And there's still a long way to go. That's true too. But at the same time, all of the victories are all being undone right now, and ironically being championed by a lot of soccer moms who are idiots and don't know how to think. But it's showing not just to the world how insane this ethic of wokeism actually is, but it's also showcasing to more and more Americans and Canadians who are formerly on the so-called left that, no, this is insane. This train is going straight towards a cliff, and I got to think differently. And I got friends who not that long ago identified as eco-globalists, eco-socialist globalists, who never imagined in a million years that they would be friends with anybody from who identified with the conservative side of things. But now I have these people telling me, the only people I can talk to are conservatives. The only people I can talk to are MAGA Republicans. I can't, and these are former like greenies who are sane. They were never ideologically committed to it. They were humans trying to make sense of the world and found themselves, like many of us have, on that path. But in reality, like the Chinese are not themselves ideologically committed to communism, obviously, or Marx, even though you'll find Xi Jinping will sometimes speak well of Marx. But then the point is, it's moral pragmatism. They're taking things. He'll then speak well of Adam Smith. He'll speak well of Friedrich List, the American system economist from Germany. The point is, they're thinking the way mature human beings think of, how do I solve problems and how do I take what works from whatever theoretical framework that is available to me, and leave what doesn't work to solve a problem. So that's what human beings who are mature do. You look for what works to solve a problem, and you leave what doesn't, whether it's in your Quran, your Bible, your Torah, whether it's in your political, philosophical, matrix that you're looking for. And you're not taking everything onto yourself, into your heart. And it's the same thing for what the U.S. used to be as well. It used to be, it wasn't, under the best of times, it was never purely capitalist per se, which, one, like Karl Marx, for all of the things one could say about him negatively, his criticism of British capitalism is solid. It's exploitative, and he makes the point that British capitalism, the British school of David Ricardo, Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, ironically, those same minds, Adam Smith, those same minds who are used in Harvard and Yale and McGill, and to shape the minds of economists in the era today that we live in, he makes the point. No, these are not actual capitalists. These are feudal capitalists. They're using a capitalist argument and theoretical logic as a cover for a system of feudal exploitation, with the appearance of freedom of your workers, but in reality, where the lowest price is the law, you're always going to be maximizing output in order to make more profits for your shareholders of a company, only by putting more laborers to work, working more hours, breaking labor laws, destroying the ability for the workers to organize and unionize. They will destroy those things. They'll use more child labor, like we're doing today in Congo, in South Africa, or in Africa for the cobalt mines. It's child labor. that we're using today. And that's what they were doing in the times of Oliver Twist in the 19th century Britain, in London and Manchester. And we'll call it capitalism, and we'll sell opium to the Chinese, and we'll call it capitalism, and we'll get the Indians to produce that opium that formerly was part of the, where the Indian economy had formerly been based on manufacturing textiles at high quality. We'll destroy that through our military. We'll ban the right for the rights of the Indians to develop manufacturing of textiles, and we'll tell them that if they want to make any kind of money, they're only allowed to produce opium that we will then control, and we will then shove down and sell to the Chinese as we organized crime systems inside of the Chinese deep state in the 19th century that will be always loyal to the city of London. And the cotton that will go into the textiles that used to be driven by the Indian textile makers will now be controlled by the Manchester and other London manufacturers, and the cotton will be produced by slave colonies, plantations of the Confederate South that will produce 80% of that cotton that will go into the textiles, and America will not be allowed. If they try to, we will destroy their textiles or their manufacturing by flooding the market with cheap goods from abroad, from mostly manufactured in London. And that way we'll undercut and destroy their ability to stand on their own 2 feet economically. And that was the fight of the founding fathers primarily, was to say, that, look, we don't have manufacturing in 1780, 1790. It was still an agrarian society with very little manufacturing. Britain had worked for a century to keep America backwards and without industry. And then the fight was, well, how do we now break free and have a full spectrum economy so we're not dependent economically on the British East India Company and the manufacturing hubs of Britain? And that was what Alexander Hamilton produced as his solution to not only unifying the nation around getting rid of the local state-based currencies by creating a new federal currency system around the national bank, and also a federal debt. But that debt would now be tied not just to paying back your creditors, but rather to the development of canals, of manufacturing, of providing incentives for new companies to be brought online, and also providing patents to people who had better ideas for manufacturing things like the cotton gin and other things that would then alleviate the burden of human physical beast labor. And that's what gave America the ability in the first 40 years, not only to exist and survive, but then to outperform Great Britain itself within a very short time and quadruple the population, both in quantitative terms, but also in quality of life, longevity, reduction of infant mortality, increased arts, things like the Smithsonian Museum and other artistic centers were also cultivated. Scientific centers were also cultivated, although the British deep state fifth columnists around people like Aaron Burr, Andrew Jackson, who killed the National Bank and stopped all of the financing of internal infrastructure development in the 1830s and into the 40s after Van Buren got in, sabotaged a lot of that growth, leading all the way up to a civil war that was organized from British high command at the same time as the British were pushing the opium wars, right, under the guise of capitalism, that they were pushing the Chinese Civil War with the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, a pseudo-synthetic cult, a pseudo-Christian synthetic cult created by British and American Jesuits, sometimes masquerading as evangelicals in southern China, who organized this cult that had upwards of 30 million devoted followers who created a civil war in China that nobody knows about today, that went on for 15 years during the U.S. Civil War, and was used by the British as one of the ways to break the Chinese during the Second Opium War, where the British said, look, if you don't give us everything we desire, as far as the concessions for Hong Kong and Shanghai and everything else, we will recognize the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom as an authentic, legitimate government, thus justifying the Civil War as the same threat that they were giving to Lincoln in America, basically saying, look, we will recognize the Confederate Republic, or it wasn't even a republic really, but we will recognize the Confederacy as a legitimate government that we will do business with, that will justify legally in the eyes of international law the Civil War. And will also thus justify why Britain and France would militarily intervene openly instead of simply covertly in the fight to break up the Union on the side of the Confederates, which is why Russia worked so hard to save the Union by sending the Russian Navy to the coasts of America as a message of this mean, that this will mean a world war with Russia officially, because Russia will come in backing up Lincoln. Because why? Well, real capitalism. At the time, you had moral, principled, national capitalists who were active around Lincoln, like Henry C. Carey, like E. Peshine Smith, who was Carey's man in Japan, who was bringing the American system of protective tariffs, a system that valued the creative mind to make discoveries and leap over the limits to growth against the Malthusian trappings of the overpopulation myth. That's Erasmus Peshine Smith was active in Japan, helping to build railways for Japan, helping them to modernize out of the samurai feudal warrior culture. You had networks around Sun Yat-sen, who was an admirer of Lincoln, studying in Hawaii, who became the first Republican revolutionary of China, bringing in Lincoln's system as best as he could, although that was sabotaged. And you had people like Sergei Witte and the Frederick List Society of inside of Russia, who were bringing Lincoln's system in, the American system of Hamilton, into developing a new type of program that would not simply base value and the behavior of money off of extracting wealth from simply labor, the way the British, feudal capitalists did, but rather by giving people training, schools, trades, but also industrial work that would be well paid, around building things like the Trans-Siberian Railway, modeled on the U.S. Transcontinental Railway in Russia, starting in 1890 and finished in 1905. And the idea was, how do we put all of the serfs to work? So all of the serfs, the 25 million that Tsar Alexander II liberated, how do we give these people who lived effectively as slaves in Russia for centuries, how do we give them a new culture of dignity and specialized skills where they could become entrepreneurs and could own the fruits of their own work? And so that was the idea, but that was sabotaged as well, with a bunch of assassinations, as well as ultimately a foreign financed color revolution that began in 1905 and destabilizing Russia, from a variety of networks, including Russian intelligence, like the Okhrana, which itself was very much tied to British and French intelligence inside of Russia that worked through various British-directed Freemasonic lodges and French Masonic lodges like the Martinist Freemasons, which had high levels of activity inside of the worst elements of the Russian feudal oligarchy and their ancient families that were always tied to the rest of the European oligarchical families that go back to the days of ancient Rome. And they're the ones who created the Okhrana. They're the ones who organized the anarchist assassination cells that were deployed to kill Tsar Alexander II, as well as dozens of interior ministers, foreign ministers throughout the 1900s, as part of the destabilization of Russia and ultimately the overthrow of an entire civilization state in favor of bringing in something that would be better controlled by the Wall Street and London apparatus. Now, that didn't go so well. In the case of Russia, it was looking bad in the 20s, but there was a fight where the nationalists were able to regroup around the figure of Stalin, who's one of the most hated individuals today for the reasons that our history books are written by the actual Nazis, that Stalin fought along with Mao and Franklin Roosevelt together. It was these three that put down the Wall Street, London-funded Nazi machine that would have brought in a transhumanist one-world government masquerading as socialist capitalist. It's called the National Socialists. But also they were very happy doing high business with capitalists like Prescott Bush and the Morgan Trust pseudo-industrialists of America, or Britain. But that was put down, that whole New World Order plan, because of the sacrifices made primarily by Russia and China and the United States, which provided the productive output that was able to supply the Russians and the Chinese with the weapons and the tools and the food that they needed to carry out their battle against the Japanese fascists on the one side and the German Wehrmacht on the other side. Without the support of Franklin Roosevelt's America, that wouldn't have happened. And had America been forced to stay out of that war the way many of his detractors wished, then I can guarantee you the Nazis and the Japanese fascists would have won, and the Nazis of Britain would have gained hegemony as well.
Yep.
And would have divided up the world already 80 years ago under this depopulated Malthusian world order of eugenics, aka transhumanism, as a new organizing religion for the elite to manage the talking cows called humans. And we would not have any of the opportunities we currently have today to fight against it. We would most likely all be dead. We wouldn't even be here. So all I have to say, that's where the fight's at. That's my rant.
Well, something, Matt, and I'd close with saying this. Okay, it is a good thing that our transhumanist masters have won the West, because the West has progressed so much. And the reason why the multipolar world just doesn't seem to understand what the West is offering is the West is offering so much. Thanks to the West, we have such amazing. Let me just show you some of the amazements, just reading off the most important calendar days in the Western Hemisphere, particularly here in the United States, which is, of course, we all know, Matthew, the United States is the largest economy in the world. It's the most powerful military in the entire universe. In fact, it's the most powerful military in the multiverse, all universes combined. And we have alien technology. But apart from all of that, Matthew, we also have Agender Pride Day. We have the Aromantic Spectrum Awareness Week. I don't know if you know what that is. That is for people who feel little to no romantic attention. They don't feel any attentions of romance directed towards them. They have a mental disorder. Now we have that awareness week for them. We have the Aromantic Visibility Day. We have the International Asexual Day. We have Ace Week. I don't know if China has Ace Week or Russia has Ace Week. Ace usually means somebody who's really good at what they do, but no, in the West, Ace means those who are on the asexual spectrum. Yes, asexual spectrum. We also have the Bisexual Awareness Week, followed by the Celebrate Bisexuality Day. We also have the Gender Fluid Visibility Week. We have the Drag Day. We have the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. We have the International Day of Pink. We have the Intersex Awareness Day, the Intersex Day of Remembrance, Lesbian Day, Lesbian Visibility Day, National Coming Out Day, Non-Binary Awareness Week, Non-Binary Peoples Day. We also have Pansexual and Pan-Romantic Awareness Day, Pronouns Day, Trans Awareness Month, Trans Awareness Week, Transgender Day of Remembrance, Trans Day of Visibility, Transparent Day, and Zero Discrimination Day. God,
they say the Biden administration is for transparency.
Transparency.
Right?
Yes.
Well, what do you do when the amount of like woke holidays outnumbers the days on the calendar? Like, at what point do you have to make the calendar bigger? Do you have to create a new calendar, or do you have to make the days shorter so you could more, like make them 12-hour days so you can have 600 days a year? Is that what you need to do?
We already have 10 months dedicated to butt sex. We need more. We need more in the West. More what in the butt at all age levels.
Oh yeah. Mature minors should have the right to choose what goes. Anyway, I can't speak like this.
No, mature minors.
Get me out of the cesspool, man. Pull me out of the cesspool, please.
Minor attracted individuals need to decide. They have to have the right to decide what they insert into their orifice. That's entirely up to them. Absolutely.
Well, they should be. If Greta Thunberg can become the honorary professor of theology and a member of the faculty of public health, and children are given the right to vote. There's a campaign in Canada to give kids under the age of 16 the right to vote, with the logic that they have more intuitive knowledge, unencumbered by the sophistical logical arguments of adults. That makes them more pure. They know how to trust the science. They don't have to overly think things. They're not polluted by the idea that they should think for themselves or do their own research. They have trust, these children of purity, and thus they should be granted the rights to run for elections and to vote. And even in New Jersey, Vermont, you have a kid who's under 17 who's running for I think it's the mayor of some city in Vermont. And the crisis is all of a sudden he's too young to himself sign the legal contracts that he's going to have to authorize for others. And it's a total breakdown of the system under its own self-contradictions. As one of the things I like about Marx is his language on the internal contradictions of a system breaking themselves down. I think that is perfectly fit for what we see unfolding right now with the breakdown of the rules-based woke liberal order.
The faster it ends, the better it is for all of us, man.
Yeah.
Matthew Ayres, thank you so much for joining us, folks. Again, you can find him over at the CanadianPatriot.org and the RisingTideFoundation.net. Get his books, subscribe to his Substack, And with that being said, we are over and out.